Imagine a night so thick with perfume that your lungs feel lacquered Kefi curling through the hypostyle like liquid dusk, sweet and resinous, catching at the back of the throat. Torchlight ripples across columns the size of cedar forests, and the stone faces of cow-eared Hathor glow and go dark and glow again, as if the goddess were breathing with the room. Somewhere in the half-scene, a chorus of sistra begins to rattle silver reeds of sound, shaking the air into a shimmer, and the hair at your nape lifts, because this is not music for people. It is music for a presence. In Thebes, in the precinct of Mut, and at the houses of Hathor, there were hours when the temple doors closed, and the world outside receded, and the body stopped being private. Not profane, never that, but consecrated. A field prepared, a vessel opened, a gate. The scribes have a word for the balance you and I break every day without noticing. Ma'at. Tonight we are here to learn what it cost to keep her standing. We moderns love Egypt for its geometry and its stillness. The pyramids taken at noon, the gold that never tarnishes, the neat rows of hieroglyphs that look like a museum learned how to breathe. That version is comfortable and incomplete. Behind the walls, there was a different grammar of creation. The gods did not make a world once and leave it winding. They made a world by acts that were intimate and repeating, and they demanded those acts, in signs and echoes, from those who ruled in their name. In the oldest cosmogony of Heliopolis, the first god, Atum, brings the cosmos into being not with thunder or fiat but with his own body, by an emission that is both metaphor and event, a seaman-bright start of time that falls into the waters of Nun and wakes twin deities, Shu and Tefnut, out of sleep. The texts say it plainly, with a candor that makes our cheeks heat 13 centuries later. Creation as self-stimulation, creation as spit and seed. The shock you feel, that is the point. The world is not abstract. It is viscous, fragrant, warm. And because it was made that way, it is kept that way. If that opening is hard to hear, it is because we have been trained to pull divinity out of the body like a thread. The Egyptians refused. They stitched higher and lower together until cloth became cloth. Think about the Isis and Osiris story you half remember. The king murdered, the body cut and scattered, the queen searching the river's edges with a patience that feels like prayer, gathering what can be gathered, and then because a piece is missing, and the world cannot renew without wholeness, fashioning a phallus for her dead god, long enough to conceive the falcon heir. It is an image that lives at the hinge of sex and resurrection, of grief and fertility, and it is not pornography. It is statecraft in mythic skin, a tutorial in how a cosmos survives its catastrophes. Even when we meet it through Greek retellings, the contour is constant. Life returns in a moment of charged union, and the union is never only two bodies, it is the black water of the Nile rising, the fields finding their strength again. So when you hear the sistrum rattle instruments with Hathor's face worked into bronze and faience, you are not hearing decoration. You are hearing a device meant to call and to calm, to turn fury into fertility. The women who shake them are not backup singers. They are technicians of presence, pacifying the eye of Ra and coaxing the goddess toward gentleness. The way a midwife coaxes breath into a newborn. Museums will tell you the facts. Sistra belonged to Hathor, mistress of love, music, intoxication, and ecstasy. They were rattled in temple rites to soothe and to summon, to usher a god into the room. We'll keep the facts. But tonight I want you to keep the sensation too, that insect-bright tremor along the stone, like papyrus reeds moved by wind, like a warning made soft. And the incense, don't forget the incense. Kaifi, with its conspiratorial list of ingredients, wine, raisins, myrrh, resins, fragrant roots, wasn't just a smell. It was an atmosphere that made bodies and boundaries porous, a sacrament you could breathe. Priests burned one fragrance at dawn, another at midday, Kaifi at dusk. Plutarch says so with that cool Greek certainty, and temple walls at Edfu and Philae carry recipes in stone. What matters is less the shopping list than the effect. Smoke that made divine, that sanctified a chamber and the people in it until touch and taste themselves were offerings. If this is starting to sound dangerous, good. The Egyptians would agree. Power is dangerous. But note the difference between forbidden and hidden. What we call taboo was, for them, restricted, sequestered inside thresholds, timed to calendars, held by oaths. The sexual is not expelled from the sacred, it is domesticated by it. In the festival season, when the goddess raged as Sekhmet and threatened to unmake humankind, the remedy was not a sermon. It was a ritual of intoxication, drinking, music, a scheduled untying until the red of beer foamed like blood, and the eye was lulled into laughter again. Archaeologists working at the Mut precinct in Karnak found the architecture for it. A porch, a hall, a liturgy written into stone, a place for managed excess to save the world from real excess. Think about the genius of that. Create a window where you can loosen the braid safely and call it piety. A different kind of danger attends the god Min, whose tall plume and raised arm have made more than one school group giggle nervously. But he is no joke. Min is an anatomy lesson in granite, generative force personified, the male principle under priestly control. Lettuce stands beside him in reliefs, stalks bleeding white sap when snapped, and if you think the symbolism is unsubtle, that's because it is not trying to hide. It is trying to teach. Seed is sacred, and so are the rules that govern when, how, and for whom it flows. The king, who is Horus the living, must display his vigor not to brag, but to guarantee harvests and heirs. Desire, in this economy, is a public resource. The hand that restrains it and releases it on time is a priestly hand. This is where we break with the easy headline. Forbidden sexual rituals tempts you towards scandal. It sells. But what Egypt's rituals actually reveal is a society that absorbed sexuality into a cosmology of maintenance. Creation began in a gesture too intimate for marble, and so creation is tended by gestures that are also intimate, bounded, choreographed, watched by ancestors and stars. The temple is not a brothel, it is a set of protocols, and if some festivities temporarily relaxed rules of dress, speech, or sobriety, that looseness followed a calendar and served a purpose. To pull a vengeful goddess back from the edge, to wake a sleepy world, to reset the delicate scale of Ma'at before it tilts into drought, plague, civil war. You will notice that the stories we have are braided from many threads, texts carved deep inside pyramids, songs and spells incised on coffins, Greek retellings from across the sea, the faint graphite of workmen's doodles and jokes. They do not agree on every point. Human things seldom do. Plutarch's detail about the missing phallus, for instance, is vivid and also foreign-voiced, contested by Egyptologists who note its absence in Egyptian language sources, even as they map its logic onto local tales, where riverfish have a role in undoing virility. That tension is part of what makes this work worth doing. Belief is not a monolith. It is a living reef, and the water that feeds it comes from many rivers. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. No, for yourself. If you believe history isn't a string of dates, but a room you can enter with your whole body, hit the like button. Subscribe if you need stories that don't flinch when the sacred and the sensual touch, and tell me where you're watching from. It's a small miracle that we can stand together in these dark rooms across time, calling old gods by name, asking them to tell the truth without the filters we put on their faces. Take one long breath. Let the kefai sit on your tongue like wine. In a moment, we will open the inner doors and step into the rites that most people could not see. We'll watch a king impersonate a god so closely that harvests depend on his performance. We'll watch women with sistra and red beer change the fate of the species. We'll watch how a civilization made sex into a liturgy strong enough to hold a river in its banks. The line between altar and body is about to dissolve. When it does, don't look away. That's when you'll finally see how the world was kept from falling apart. Inside the innermost court, the air changes thicker, sweeter, a closeness that feels intentional, like the room has decided to hold its breath. What happens here is not a secret because it is shameful. It is secret because it is powerful. The priests have a word for the first moment of power, a god alone with himself, inventing a world with what his body can give. Heliopolis tells it without blushes. Atom does not thunder the cosmos into place. He coaxes it from his own flesh and emission, a spatter of beginnings whose shockwaves become shoe and tefnut, dry air and wet breath, the first hinge between waters. The pyramid texts are startlingly frank about it, and equally frank about the metaphor that shadows its spit, sneeze, seed the verbs of a body working. Creation in Egypt begins as contact, not command, and because it begins that way, it must be renewed that way, in acts that are intimate and disciplined, enacted by the only being permitted to impersonate a god without blasphemy, the king. You already know the next story's outline, the way we all do pieces in the river, a woman walking the banks with a grief that moves mountains. Isis finds what she can of Osiris. One piece is missing. In Greek retellings, fish have eaten the phallus. Either way, the world cannot turn without completion, so she makes one. That is the hinge. Not smut, not mythic trivia, but the grammar of return, a crafted organ, a charged union, a pregnancy that sets kingship back on its rails. Out of that joining comes Horus, And out of Horus comes a job description for every ruler after him: be the living falcon who keeps the flood on schedule and the fields awake by staging. In ritual, the same stubborn victory of life over ruin. When you look at the reliefs with a calm face, a queen leaning into a god who has taken her husband's form, a goddess cradling a royal infant under a canopy of ankhs, you are watching a civilization say, renewal is embodied. To repair the world, you must touch it. But kingship cannot renew alone. The levers of that renewal are distributed among deities who specialize in the raw materials of life. Meet Min plumed, steady, unembarrassed, an anatomy lesson and an agricultural lecture in one. His cult is older than many cities. His likeness holds a flail. His manhood is explicit, and at his feet, crisp, leafed lettuce leans in bunches. Break its stalk, and it bleeds a white sap. The message, carved in stone and eaten on holy days, is impossible to miss. Desire is not a private hobby. It is a fuel. Lettuce for Min was not salad but sacrament, an edible emblem of virility and growth. In some rites it was offered first, then consumed by men seeking potency, the god's green signature traveling into human flesh. We are far from locker room jokes. We are in a chemistry of symbols where plants, bodies, and seasons answer each other in the same language. Now picture a year when the Nile hesitates. The court whispers. The scribes make more offerings than usual. It is festival time for Min in Koptos or Akhmim, a procession that smells like sun-warmed stone and fresh-cut stalks. The king appears not as an individual with appetites, but as a principle with obligations. Horus the living, the male force under vows. He raises the flail, presents offerings, and depending on the period, enacts gestures of controlled vigor before the god's shrine, signaling to court and cosmos alike that creative power is present and governed. No orgy hides here. The legs of the ritual are public. Cadence, offering, spectacle. If rumors drift in later centuries about more explicit acts, the stone itself stays clean of them. What it insists on, again and again, is the choreography of capacity. The king's body as instrument, not indulgence. And still, even that liturgy is only one side of the mechanism. The other is a marriage most people never see, staged in a specific season when the river fattens and the sky forgets its thirst. The Opet festival is an hour of recrowning and reconceiving. Bark shrines float the Theban triad Amun, Mut, Khonsu from Karnak to Luxor, the bark swaying on shoulders and water like living hearts. Behind screened doorways, the king merges with Amun in a ceremony ancient writers call a sacred marriage, and at Luxor's birthroom, the point is made with reliefs you can trace with your fingers. A god enters the queen's chamber in the form of her husband. Breath is given through the ankh. The child to come is already king in the logic of the scene. It is theatre, yes, but not pretense. It is a maintenance rite with sexual grammar, a way of saying that sovereignty is fertile or it is nothing. Do not confuse this with license. Egypt does not mistake heat for holiness. The line is not erased, it is patrolled. When the priests at Karnak's southern precinct wanted to stop a goddess from devouring the world, they did not preach at her. They brewed beer the colour of blood, and drank until her wrath fell asleep in their laughter. Modern excavations at Mut's temple have turned up the architecture of that solution. The porch and halls designed to host managed excess, a festival of ritual drunkenness where music, incense, and sanctioned abandon transformed a cosmic threat into a communal exhale. The dangerous thing is not repressed here. It is invited, contained, and turned. That is the Egyptian trick. Build a room where you can unfasten the knot without tearing the cloth. You may be waiting for the shock story, the king pouring seed into the Nile at dawn, the courtyards full of acts that would make prudery faint. That rumor wafts through guidebooks and late-night forums like a desert breeze. But the texts we can actually touch give us something subtler and, in truth, stranger. They give us metaphors hardening into ceremonies, ceremonies stabilizing a state, and a state investing its most guarded spaces with images at the hinge of sex and sovereignty. The flail and the phallus, the sap and the seed, the god with the queen with the god. The warmth of it is not for titillation, and the restrictions around it are not prudery. They are the safety valves of a world that believes bodies are instruments, and that the song of renewal must be played on them carefully, publicly, on time. Even the myths we laugh at, Horus and Seth, lettuce and humiliation, divine fluids smuggled and revealed, are not bathroom humor so much as courtroom drama. In that tale, the boundaries of dominance, consent, and rightful rule get argued in sexual images so explicit they double as legal exhibits, and when the Ennead renders judgment, it is not lust that wins but rightful order. Egypt keeps returning to the same theme. Desire is a resource, legitimacy is a fertility. The river listens. If the rites are forbidden, it is because not everyone gets to touch the switch. By the time the torches gutter and the last sistrum shake fades into the columns, the lesson has landed. The body is not private property. It is leased to the cosmos. The skin is an altar, the breath a libation, the seed a state treasury under priestly lock. In the next hour we will press our faces closer to the reliefs, into the places where the stone itself admits what could and could not be done, and why. We'll see how laughter sobered a lioness, how etiquette kept power from spilling, and how a civilization built a cage of velvet around the most volatile force it knew then trained kings and goddesses to reach inside and touch it without getting burned. Listen to the women first. Not because the men are silent here, no one is, but because the women tune the room to the goddess, and once the goddess is tuned, the world softens its teeth. In the precinct of Mut, south of Karnak's forest of columns, the night crowds close like reeds, and the air goes molten with breath. You can hear the chantresses before you see them. Anklets whispering against stone, sistra shaking a silver rain, voices rising in a call that isn't quite song and isn't quite speech. They are the ones who make joy. A phrase that sounds light until you remember joy is a technical term in Egypt, a tool that pacifies the Eye of Ra when she comes back as a lion with a taste for blood. Hathor stands behind their throats like a pillar. Lady of the Sycamore, Golden One, mistress of music and intoxication and the trembling edge where pleasure leans into trance. She wears a face that men mistake for sweetness and women know as voltage. You've seen her on cosmetic spoons and mirror handles, on pendant menats and temple capitals. Everywhere the Egyptians dared to admit they understood the body's grammar, but in the courts of her houses she is not a motif. She is a presence that has to be managed. You do not debate a flood, you cut channels and you pray the banks hold. Tonight is a night for channels. The beer is already waiting in broad-bellied jars, foamed and red, coloured to look like danger. There is a story, old as a warning, where the goddess in her fury cannot stop killing. Ra spreads fields with what looks like blood, but is beer in disguise, and when she drinks it, the world is spared because laughter finally reaches the part of her that remembers being gentle. The festival of drunkenness reenacts that turn on a schedule, not a tavern riot, a liturgy, music swapped for teeth, laughter deployed like a net, intoxication measured until it is safe to spill. If the boundaries of conduct look a little rubber in this space, if jokes go low and eyes go soft, if bodies lean and sing words they would not dare in daylight understand, that slackness is a sacrament. A window is opened so that the storm can leave without blowing down the house. Watch the choreography of it. A procession over thresholds that matter, porches carved to receive, halls built to contain, and inside them, women who know exactly when to rattle, when to sing, when to stop. Their instruments are not props. A sistrum shaken at the wrong time is a door slammed in a god's face. A manat swung too soon is a plea before the court has even sat. These officiants calibrate the room like physicians lay a pulse between fingers. They know the smell where Kefi tilts from sweet into heady. They read the faces when the red beer has gone from courage to blur. The point is not abandon. The point is return. Bring the lioness back to the woman, the eye back to the face, the world back to its balance. If this seems a contradiction piety achieved by untying, remember that Egypt's categories are stitched to weather and to river, not to our binaries. The same goddess who nurses the king at her breast is the one whose rage killed men like flies. The same festival that sanctions laughter also requires it. There is an ethical obligation to joy, because joy is how you disarm annihilation. You and I were taught to think of religion as a list of don'ts. Here, devotion is a choreography of well-timed yes. Inside the sanctuary, a queen waits in a room that remembers birth. You saw the story carved at Luxor, where a god enters the royal chamber in a husband's form, and the exchange of breath writes sovereignty into a child's body. The women around the queen are not attendants in our modern sense. They are technicians of threshold and time. They know which day on the festival calendar can carry a vow without breaking, which hour the bark of a moon should dock to make the symbolic marriage feel like more than sculpture. They dress a human body until it can receive an idea, and they keep the men from mistaking that idea for themselves. Outside, the verses are less restrained. New Kingdom love songs bend the language into metaphors so lush they almost drip. Sisters who are not siblings, gardens that are not gardens, lotus mouths and fish pond eyes and hands like the cool of evening water. The poems are audacious in their tenderness. A girl wants her lover's feet in her doorway. A boy begs for his heart to stop running like a startled gazelle. Does that offend the temple? Not at all. The poems are the secular echo of the sacred fact. Bodies are how meaning arrives on earth. If the metaphors go blush, dark, if lettuce is not just lettuce, if pomegranates are not just fruit, remember that in this country a plant can be a hieroglyph. A stalk snaps and bleeds white sap. A man nods, laughing and reverent in the same breath. The world is constantly reminding you that creation is a sticky business. And yet this matters. The looseness you feel during festival does not spill into ordinary time as license. Egypt is allergic to sprawl. It loves containers. The forbidden here is almost always restricted. A curtain, a calendar square, a purity rule that says who may pass and when. The women who lead the singing do not leave their roles at the threshold. They take the quiet authority home, where household shrines hold sycamore twigs and perfume cones, and where the dead under the floor grandmothers whose names are said every morning listen to the clatter of bowls and remember that they once rattled Sistra too. The body remains consecrated, but consecration has settings. Full lamp, wick, low, banked coals. You will hear travelers from later worlds whisper about temple prostitution, as if the Egyptians staged public intercourse to feed their gods. That is the wrong lens, ground in another empire's glass. What happens here is theatre with ethical stakes, not sex work draped in incense. The closest we come to transgression is sanctioned intoxication in sacred halls and flirtation in lyric, made safe by metaphor, and even then the priests hold it with both hands, turning it like a jar to check for cracks. If a woman's dress slips in a relief, it is to mark her as a musician of Hathor, not to invite voyeurism. If a man in a song craves the scent of myrrh in his lover's hair, it is to teach you that perfume is a sacrament and longing a kind of prayer. Look again at the faces. The chantresses are smiling, yes, but the smiles are professional. The queen's expression is not dreamy, it is intent. Even the drunkenness is learned men and women practice how to cross that river and come back with what they went to fetch. When the jars are finally empty and the lioness is purring, the halls are swept, the instruments wrapped, the jewelry unhooked with fingers that do not shake. The goddess has accepted the bribe of joy. Tomorrow the sun will rise without murder. Balance, like any good illusion, is built with nerves of steel. Before we leave, hold this paradox in your mouth like the last sip of beer. Here, a sacred rite can look like laughter, and a national security measure can sound like love poetry. The thresholds are thinner than ours, but they are also better guarded. What you're calling forbidden might simply be too strong to leave unattended. The women understand this. They have been keeping the switchboard of the cosmos lit since the first sistrum was bent into shape. When the world frays again, and it will, they will be the ones who hear the lion's footfall first. In our next step, we will walk away from sanctioned excess into the rooms with locked cupboards, the places where censors and gossip have muddied the view. We'll take up the scrolls that make even modern scholars clear their throats, the obscene drawings that laughed at power, the papyrus that everyone loves to misunderstand and ask what was actually outlawed, what was only hidden, and what was a joke not meant for outsiders' eyes. The line between secrecy and sin is about to get sharp. Bring your best light. Open the cupboards with clean hands. Not because the papyri inside are fragile, though they are, but because the human things they hold are. A century of rumor has turned Egypt's restricted rites into a carnival it never was. If we do this right, we will separate what was hidden from what was outlawed, what made priests blush from what made priests necessary. Begin with the rules, because without them all the rest looks feral. Temple purity was not a mood, it was a regimen. Priests shaved, everywhere, not for vanity, but to leave no stray thing that could carry pollution into a god's room. They washed by schedule, abstained by schedule, ate by schedule. Sex, like garlic and certain fish, belonged to the list of powers you did not bring across a threshold unless the calendar said so and the ritual named it. The pure place Waybit was exactly that. A white chamber where objects were washed in natron and words were said correctly or not at all. The body was capable of summoning gods, therefore the body had to be disciplined like a blade. Desire wasn't the enemy, sloppiness was. Now pivot to the locked drawer everyone asks about. A long roll from Deir el Medina, the workman's village that built royal tombs and developed a taste for sharp humor. The Turin erotic papyrus is famous for reasons that have more to do with us than with them. You have seen the reproduction's acrobatics of sex paired with cartoons of animals performing human crafts. It looks obscene. It is obscene. And it is also parody. Its men are not gods. They are balding and pot-bellied. Their erections heroic only because the artist is being cruel. The women are idealized to the point of caricature, as fantasy demands. After the bawdy panels come animals as scribes and carpenters, donkeys swinging mallets, lions playing at bureaucracy. The role is making fun in the same breath of lust without discipline and of officials who take themselves too seriously. This is not a manual smuggled out of a sanctuary. It is a backstage laugh from craftsmen who spent their days carving the most solemn images a state can command, and who needed, some nights, to let the string go slack. The obscene and the absurd walk, arm in arm. That is satire, not sacrament. Scatter that insight across the ostraca, the chips of limestone and flakes of pot where village hands sketched during pauses in the workday. You'll find erotic doodles there, too. A woman balancing on a chair, a man with ambitions outpacing anatomy. They live beside donkeys judging magistrates and cats serving mice at banquets, the social order flipped for fun. Put those shards back into their place, a literate working class winking at power, practicing line and curve, granting themselves permission to draw what the temple walls would never allow. The laughter is local, and so are the obscenities. If you've ever seen a construction crew's break room pin-up board, you already know the tone. Now imagine those same hands going back to chisel a goddess with the concentration of prayer. Complexity lives in the same body without contradiction. We can say more about forbidden, because Egypt did. Court records and funerary texts carry an ethic of restraint into ordinary time. Do not lie with another's spouse. Do not force. Do not boast with your parts as if they were a god unto themselves. In the negative confessions, a soul stands before 42 assessors and denies, one by one, the violences of appetite. The language is simple and steady. What it guards is not prudishness, but the tightrope any society must walk if it wants to be both alive and bearable. The point was never to shame heat out of the human. The point was to ensure it flows where it fertilizes, and not where it floods. When boundaries were crossed for politics, the culture labeled it plainly exception. Royal sibling marriage under the Ptolemies, brother with sister crowned as Philadelphoi, was not Egypt's popular norm. It was theatre with teeth, grafting Greek dynastic strategy to native myth. A throne couple made to mirror the divine pair, Isis and Osiris, so perfectly that legitimacy looked biological. For villagers and craftsmen, the incest line held. For the palace, the line was redrawn to stage divinity under public law. You can dislike the move, and many did, but you should read it correctly, as a tool of sovereignty, not a neighborhood custom. The farther we get from the palace, the more ordinary kinship resumes its shape. Return to the temples and how they look at bodies. A musician of Hathor appears with a beaded collar, a manat at her neck, linen so fine it reads as skin. That is not a peep show, it's a code. Transparency in carving signals liminality, proximity to the goddess whose domains include music, perfume, and the softening of wrath. Such images do not invite spectators to ogle. They instruct worshippers to recognize a role. The same is true of Min's body on a shrine, explicit by design, organ and flail presented as emblems of controlled fecundity. The message is not, watch, it is, remember what this power is for, and if anyone in the room refuses the container, that, too, has consequences. Adultery was not only a trespass against a spouse, it was a breach against the household's gods, and, by extension, against the community that needed children to be clearly fathered, inheritances to be legible, lines of ancestor veneration to run unbroken. Punishments varied with class and era: fines, beatings, divorces that stripped the guilty party of goods, but the logic is constant. Disorder at the bed echoes into disorder at the tomb. Egypt was never sentimental about this. It was practical. Chaos is expensive. Hold one more tension in your hands. Laughter as a safety valve, and secrecy as stewardship. The festival that made room for sacred drunkenness did it under supervision, as a way to turn a lioness into a woman again. The papyrus that made room for filthy jokes did it to puncture pomposity and bleed off pressure. Both are ways of managing volatility. Neither is a license for priests to behave as rumor says they did. If any intercourse touched the threshold of the holy, it did so in mythic reenactment and icon, not as public sport. The closest the state came to sexual theatre was the sacred marriage performed behind veils with words and gestures more symbolic than anatomical, and the coronation scenes where gods breathe life across a queen's lips. Intimacy remains charged because it remains potentially catastrophic. That is why it is restricted. Watch how all this tightens language. Forbidden in Egypt often means you are not sworn, not shaved, not timed to the hour, not carrying the right perfumes in your hair or the right silence in your mouth. It does not always mean wicked, it often means potent. The temple door is not a moral wall so much as a voltage sign. Most of us are not trained to touch what crackles behind it. We will need this clarity for what comes next, because the last cupboards are colder. The rites of raising a spine pillar, of planting a symbol in the earth and calling it back to stiffness, the myth where a widow builds an organ to restore a lost god long enough to be a mother. Again, these are the places where sex and resurrection climb into the same bed and refuse to move aside. We will stand with a crowd as a jade is lifted and feel, in our own backs, the ripple the priests meant us to feel. Bone returning to strength, irrigation ditches filling, a corpse remembering it is a field. We will walk to the river's lip where night smells like silt and copper and hear why a flood is a marriage and why a marriage, properly timed, is public infrastructure. Before we go there, close the cupboards gently. The papyrus sleeps, the ostraca grin in the dark. The men who drew them are dust and names on ostraca of their own. The women who rattled the sistra are beads in the ground. The rules they kept razor to skin, water to hands, silence to mouth, are the only reason their gods had rooms to live in. If the rites you came looking for feel less scandalous now and more exacting, good. Egypt has not disappointed you. It has corrected your lens. The line between sin and secrecy is not where you thought it was. It runs straight through the human chest, between appetite and oath, and the people of the Nile learned how to draw it in ink that does not fade. Stand in a courtyard at dawn when the stone is the color of a bruise and the breath of the river has crept this far inland. A quiet crowd gathers around a wooden pillar bound in linen strips, its top flaring into 4 shelves like the cross-section of a palm. You have seen the sign 100 times on amulets and coffin boards beside life and power like an older brother, the Jed. They tell you it is stability. Tonight you will learn what that means in a body. The priests grip the ropes. At a signal, drums tilt from thud into heartbeat. The pillar rises slowly, shivering, uncertain, and then there locks into vertical, straight as a spine that remembers itself. The shout that follows is relief disguised as piety. People weep, because they are watching more than timber stand. They are watching a corpse turn towards spring. The Djed is the backbone of Osiris. Raising it is a public resurrection, a state ceremony that tells farms and wombs and dynasties. Up. It happens in the season when the fields are saturated and the world smells green, a rite Egyptians called koyak, when the god's death and return are staged with a craftsman's precision effigies wrapped. Gardens seeded, beds shaped to a god's silhouette, and watered until barley bristles through the linen like hair. To the modern eye, the symbolism is almost embarrassingly direct. The priests did not mind. Egypt believed in teaching with objects you could touch. The grain-sown Osiris beds, the pillar lifted before a city, these were lessons you could feel in your back and your fingers. Stability is not a mood, it is labor, performed on time, in public, with the whole country watching. Now follow the rite into the small rooms where the god's body is made of earth and seed. The priests knead Nile silt with barley, press it into molds, bind it in linen, and lay it in a bed shaped like a coffin. Water will do the rest. The thing will sprout. What returns is food. Osiris green of the field, the hymns call him. Bread and beer are his flesh poured into you day after day. The name for barley and the name for beloved fold over each other until sustenance and intimacy share a mouth. Here, the erotic is not a sideshow, but the grammar of agriculture. An organ rises, a pillar rises, a field rises. Egypt lets the words sit on each other until even a child understands. If you want the world to come back, you need more than a law. You need a body that can answer the command. This is why the oldest creation story is unembarrassed about how cosmos begins with an emission from the first god, atom, and the shock of difference that follows from it. It is not lurid to say so, it is honest. Egyptians folded this honesty into their calendar so thoroughly that the river itself learned to be a metaphor. When the inundations spilled into the basins, Hapi was praised as a plump-bellied giver whose waters impregnated the fields. The moist black soil Kemet was the god's generous body spread for sowing. In relief after relief, the Nile binds lotus and papyrus together, Upper and Lower Egypt married by flow. The inundation is a wedding and a birth and a good year at the tax office, all at once. This is not coyness, it is state theology. Liquids are never just liquids here. Sap, blood, milk, perfume, beer, each has its traffic with life and death. Each is regulated with joy, with rules, which is why you will not find orgies on temple walls. What you will find is a choreography of rising. The king receives milk from Hathor's breast, divine lactation turning a man into a son of the goddess by the simplest of sacraments feeding. The queen receives breath at her lips from a god in her husband's form. and a corridor away the backbone of a dead green god is lifted toward the sun. The logic is relentless. Give, so that rise can follow. The state makes altars out of mouths and spines and stalks, then times their awakening to the seasons, because a city cannot run on abstractions. It runs on bodies kept inside language. Now, about the grave. Death in Egypt is a long verb. It involves resin and linen and a discipline of love that slows rot into ritual. Outsiders have turned even this into a sexual rumor mill stories where embalmers must delay women's bodies out of fear of outrage. Reports of violations that stand in for fantasies disguised as history. What the Egyptians left us is different. A manual of decency organized around the idea that a corpse is not an object but a future. The opening of the mouth is not erotic. It is engineered tenderness. A statue or a mummy is touched at the lips with a hooked blade so that seeing, smelling, tasting, speaking functions that make a person can start again on the other side. To touch the mouth is to restart the universe in miniature. Even the knives are consecrated as mouth openers and breath returners, never as violations. If a Greek tourist wrote a tale meant to sober apprentices, that says more about his genre than about Egyptian rites. The rule in the waybet is the rule in the temple. Power requires purity, or it curdles into crime. Forbidden, then, returns as a matter of voltage. The acts that knit sex to resurrection are public and disciplined. The acts that confuse hunger with holiness are punished or laughed out of the room. When the D-age rises, the city watches. When Osiris beds sprout, 1,000 kitchens bake the god into bread. When the hymn to Osiris names him Lord of the Overflowing, no one snickers. Children pour water in the courtyard and cheer because they know that, when the earth drinks, their mothers will have wheat to grind, and their fathers will have beer to brew. The joke drawings belong to the quarry, the satire to the lunch break, the tenderness to the house and the shrine. It is all human. It is all sorted. There is a tenderness to this that we miss when we come hunting scandal. Picture a widow in a mourning dress like dusk. She has learned the story every child knows. When a part is missing, you make one. When a spine has lost itself, you raise it. When a god goes to ground, you plant him and water him until he breaks the surface green. Her grief is not puritanical, it is practical. In the women's rooms at the back of the house, she speaks to the dead softly and sets bread on the shelf and pours milk and beer until the air smells like comfort. Love here is logistics. Resurrection is household economies scaled up to a nation. Return to Min for a last lesson. The lettuce stalk breaks, the white sap beads. A murmur runs through a festival crowd that knows how to read. Men eat for vigor. Women laugh without mockery. The king performs what he must to tell the land there will be seed enough and heirs enough, and the long centuries will have a spine to run down. The statue's explicitness is never pornographic, because nothing about it is private. It is a farm report in stone. Step back from the picture until you can see how the liquids line up. The beer that disarms a lioness, the milk that mothers a king, the sap that mirrors seed, the water that fattens the black earth, the resin that keeps a body sweet while the family learns to let go. Blood is rare in this list, not because it is shunned, but because the Nile has already taken that role. Other cultures feed divinity with red. Egypt, water-rich at the good hour, feeds with flood and with grain, with breath returned and spines stood up straight. The economy of exchange is gentle where it can be and stern where it must. When the river fails, sternness becomes hunger. When kings fail, ceremony strains. But the grammar of renewal remains in place, a prayer of objects. By midday the djed casts a clean black shadow and the drums have gone to sleep. The priests unwind the tension from their hands and laugh the way people laugh after carrying something heavy together. In the side courts, women upend pots of barley into baskets, and a child claps every time the grains ring like rain. You can feel in your own back what the city has done. The lift has put a rod where your fear was. This is how Egypt kept going, not with miracles thrown like spears, but with rituals that taught hands and spines what to do when the sky changes its mind. Next, we will follow the sign of stability into the later centuries when Greece and Rome and new faiths arrive with their own ways of guarding bodies and souls. We will watch altars change, addresses, milk traded for oil, bread for bread of another name, and see what survives when a symbol sheds its skin. We will end where we began, in a room of perfume and breath, listening for the oldest rhythm, the one that asks us whether we use our bodies to hold the world together or to break it. When new gods arrive, the old ones do not die here. They change masks and keep breathing. On the docks at Alexandria, Amphorae exhale wine from islands you've only tasted as rumor, and in the perfume halls apothecaries grind resins into powders that smell like dusk. Isis learns Greek, and then Latin without losing her Egyptian accent. She becomes mistress of the countless names, a goddess whose face fits any harbor. Her sistrum crosses the sea. In Delos, in Piraeus, in Rome, respectable matrons shake the same bronze rattle temple women shook at Dendera and Thebes. The king's sacred marriage turns into mysteries you enter by initiation. In Pompeii there is a house where wall paintings show a devotee led, veiled, into a chamber of breath and light. The icon of Isis nursing Horus migrates, centuries later, into another language of tenderness, mother and child under a different theology, and the new faith swallows incense whole. Continuity here is never simple, never a straight road, but you can track the footprints, music that pacifies, smoke that consecrates, bread and drink that bind a people not as copies but as rhymes. In the south, the old houses keep smaller altars alive. A clay figure of Tauret, hippopotamus mother with pendulous belly and lion's paws, stands guard at a bedroom door. The god Bees scowls and dances at the foot of a bed, ugly on purpose, because ugly frightens ugly away. Ivory wands engraved with leaping protectors arc like moons in a woman's hand as she labors. Amulets in the shape of the Tiet, knot or the Died hang where breath passes, to snag harm like a fisherman's net. What priests do on festival days, midwives do at midnight. Manage danger with songs and objects that carry old signatures. A woman rubs oil into her hair that smells like blue water and honey. A man threads a faience charm onto a cord and ties it around a child's wrist. This is not superstition in the soft sense. It is logistics, learned over centuries how to keep the newborn in the breath-giving world. If you want the state's instrument panel, return to the rhythm we've been mapping all along. Purification, perfume, sound, manageable excess, symbol. Egypt's psycho-spiritual technology is frank about its parts and careful with its outcomes. It begins with shaving and washing, resetting the body to zero. Then the air is engineered, Chi-Fi or its kin pulling the room toward dusk, making membranes permeable. Sound takes the next keep, sistrum and menat and drum setting a pulse you can ride. Then comes the consented tilt-red beer, festival laughter, a window of looseness under supervision followed by the lift or the joining. The Dayed pulled upright, the bark crossing thresholds, the god made present to give breath or milk or decree. You can call this magic if you like, but a better word is craft. The Egyptians learned how to move minds and bodies together until vision didn't need to close its eyes to see. Greeks bring other tools, dream incubation in temple dormitories where suppliants sleep for a healing vision. Philosophers debating whether God is mind or wind or fire, and Egypt answers with a centuries-long shrug. Call it what you want, but remember to feed it on time. In the Serapeum, incense still hangs like a curtain. In the street, the baker's boys still learn when dough rises best. In the palace, a queen still sits for a relief that says sovereignty is born of more than a crown. Later, when bishops take the keys, the smoke keeps rising under new names. A thurible swings where once a brazier stood. The chant finds a different mode but keeps the same work, turning air into a corridor where the human and the more than human brush sleeves. The households do not stop negotiating with power just because Rome stamps coins with other heads. Deir el-Medina is long silent, but its habit survives. Write to the dead when living judges fail you. Letters to the dead show up on bowls and stale complaints about theft, infertility, nightmares, and the tone is intimately legal. You, grandmother, you, uncle, do not ignore me. It is the same voice that fills marriage contracts with exacting tenderness, dowries itemized, rights spelled out, divorces negotiated with property intact, and children named without shame. Love poems still throb, though the metaphors trade lotus ponds for gardens of other climates. In bedchambers, practical knowledge flows in whispers, more reliable than rumor, honey and gum for barriers, timing learned by cycle and star. The body is not a scandal, it is an economy, governed by paperwork and prayer. If you listen for scandal, you will keep hearing laughter instead, a city's private safety valve. Courtyard jokes survive the centuries because the human spine is funny when it isn't behaving, and desire is slapstick unless you contain it. That is why the obscene drawings make us smile and the temple reliefs make us straighten. The two are not enemies, they are checks and balances. Satire pricks the inflated, liturgy trains the volatile. Together they keep the river in its banks. What breaks, when empires change, are not the instincts, it is the contracts that choreograph them. The Ptolemies use sibling marriage like a crown paste, and teach clerks to defend the move with precedent. Rome flirts with Isis, and then outlaws her, and then flirts again. Christians condemn the old sacrifices and keep the candles. Through all this, women still stand with beads that calm rooms. Men still learn to pull a weight rope taut without panic. Children still grow up on bread that owes its grammar to a god cut into pieces and replanted green. The ritual vocabulary, the verbs to raise, to pacify, to join, to breathe into, does not vanish. It goes to live in new houses with new landlords and keeps doing the same work. Making bodies into hinges the world can swing on. At the street level, where history actually happens, you can still chart the sexuality of extremes, except the extremes are not scandalous, they are seasonal. There are days to loosen, and there are days when linen stays starched and mouths stay closed. A festival can license a joke that would cost you your job on an ordinary afternoon. A court can void a marriage with precision and no malice. A priest can look at a barley bed sprouting in a coffin and see not morbidity but a quarterly report. The system works. And then there is grief, which refuses systems until you dress it in one. In late cemeteries, a mother stands with a jar of oil she has warmed between her palms. She pours a little on a slab and watches it darken, and the stain looks like a bruise at first and then like a polished eye. She speaks to the stone. The words are old and, by now, everybody's. They ask for the same things. They always ask for safe crossings, kindly gates, the chance to be remembered with bread and cool water. Nothing here is hidden because it is wicked. The doors close to keep potency from scattering. Even sorrow can be too strong to leave unattended. We have called this episode Forbidden, but you know better now. The Egyptians were not prudes who repressed the body or libertines who flaunted it. They were engineers of feeling, experts at threading appetite through ritual until it came out as policy. They did not deny that the world began in an intimate act. They built a civilization on the maintenance of that intimacy contained, timed, aimed at crops and heirs, and the difficult, daily job of keeping Mart upright when weather and kings fail. In their mirror, we see ourselves without the flattering filters. We have our own festivals of managed abandon, our own bread and smoke, our own ways of laundering power in the laundry of the sacred. We still bargain with forces, we barely control markets, climates, hungers, and we still ask our ceremonies to train us not to panic. So take one last breath in the perfumed dark. Hear the faint insect-bright rattle of the sistrum one more time. Watch the smoke braid and unbraid itself in the columned air. This is what it looks like when a people refuse to split spirit from flesh, when they teach their children with instruments and vegetables and spines and milk. This is what it looks like when the most dangerous forces are not expelled, but baptized into usefulness. We are not here to gawk at scandal. We are here to admire architecture, of bodies, of rules, of songs that keep the lioness from eating the sun. If you've come this far, you already know the answer to the oldest question. What holds the world together? Hands, mostly. Hands, and what they learn to lift without breaking.